Welcome to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and today we are going to the arcade and we are going to save Princess Daphne from the dragon's lair. But before we do that, let me tell you how you can follow and support the podcast. Okay? You can watch a full video breakdown on YouTube and on Spotify. You can obviously follow the podcast over on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow the pod on socials. That is on TikTok and on Instagram at Femme Furious Pod. If you have any thoughts, feelings, opinions about today's episode, you can send me an email. That's at femmefuriouspod@gmail.com. And last but not least, you can join Lipstick and Lore, which is our free newsletter. It gives you access to behind-the-scenes content, gives you the Fast Five, which is a weekly content roundup, lots of other fun stuff over there. So go check out the newsletter if you haven't already. All right, let's take a chic peek at today's episode. This is just a blanket spoiler warning for today's episode. We are predominantly focusing on Season 2, Episodes 1 through 3. However, we may talk about things from Season 1, and it's very possible that we will talk about things from other parts of the Stranger Things universe, including future seasons. So if you haven't watched all of Stranger Things, first of all, how have you survived this cultural zeitgeist? But also, make sure that you go and watch before you listen, okay? We are diving into Season 2, Episodes 1 through 3. I know I said that already, but I'm going to say it again. If you need a recap, this is what we are doing before the final season. These are not deep dives. These are quickie episodes where we will just be sort of giving a synopsis of the episodes that we watched during this little leg of our rewatch. So let's dive into our Femme Frame, which is where we will talk about key feminist themes, herstory, cultural context, and more. Now, I thought about a way cooler Femme Frame. After I put this out, I realized that I would really love to do a deep dive on girls and the arcade, like a Mad Max experience. Anyway, that's something that might be coming in a future episode. I'm just letting you know the Femme Frame might not match necessarily what we're talking about because I actually had a lot of regrets about not doing it, but I didn't want to rewrite this particular Femme Frame because we're going to talk about survivor's guilt today. And I do think that this is important, and I do think that it is a main driver for a lot of our characters is this idea of survivor's guilt, particularly the Wheelers, Nancy and Mike. However, we're going to predominantly focus on Nancy because, hello, I'm furious. So by the time we hit Season 2, Episode 1, Stranger Things, Nancy's shoulders are already carrying a weight that is even heavier than what we would presume a Demogorgon to be. She is reeling from the loss of Barb. It is the realest friend that she has had to date, and that guilt pulses through her in these early scenes, and it's a real motivator for her for the rest of the season, as we'll come to see. So today we are unpacking women and survivor's guilt, especially when the victim is your best friend. We will dig into some stats, we will dig into some research, some heartbreaking stories perhaps, and then bring it all back to Nancy's. Buckle up, know your trigger warnings, because this Femme Frame is going to be about grief, it's going to be about guilt, and it is going to be about the trauma of surviving, particularly when you are surviving your best friend's death. So let's look at some facts. Research shows that losing a close friend can hit you as hard as losing a family member. Friends are considered psychological kin. This came from an article that I found from the Conversation Plus One, which is if your social circle shrinks, your resilience shrinks. And so simply by losing a friend and losing that physical person that you would have to reflect off of or bounce your ideas off of, or in your social circle that you would find strength in, simply by losing them, because the circle literally shrinks, so does your ability to cope, which I thought was really interesting when I was reading that article. Upon a deeper dive, I found that a 14-year Australian study found that bereaved friends, especially women, suffer sharper declines in mental health, social functioning, and vitality for up to 4 years. This is published out on PubMed, okay? And I want to give you guys, like, if you're like, hey, why are you citing stuff now when you don't normally cite stuff? Even though sometimes I do some pretty deep research, I am not a historian. I am not a doctor. I'm just giving you what I've read and synthesizing it in a way that makes sense for you. I feel like I need to put that disclaimer out there in this particular episode. There are studies with young adult survivors of childhood cancer that have showed survivors' guilt correlated directly with their PTSD symptoms, even accounting for other risk factors. And again, this was from PubMed. So while specific studies on best friend survivors' guilt are actually quite rare, qualitative research and grieving testimonies offer us a haunting clarity. After just 20 minutes of digging through grief communities on Reddit, I decided that while there are so many stories that resonated with what I was talking about today, they were so raw and so heavy that I did not want to use them as cited sources. But you can do your own research, go on Reddit, do your own little Reddit deep dive, because these stories really do resonate. And they resonate because they capture guilt that is so irrational, and yet it is relentless and it is deeply human. Okay, so now let's rewind to Hawkins. Nancy is experiencing survivor's guilt in a way that capitulates the irrationality, the relentlessness, and the deeply human components of her experience around her grief of Barb and the loss of Barb. She struggles with feeling like she is responsible for Barb's death, and her guilt only compounds when she discovers Barb's parents are selling their house to fund this investigation when she knows that Barb is dead and that Barb is not coming back. It doesn't really help either that she's not being told by anyone in her life, I'm here for you, I've got you, give it to me. She's got one hand stretched out to Steve, who, because he wants to protect Nancy, it's coming obviously from a good place, insists that she just stuffs it down. So she pushes back her grief. She is forced to then be hyper aware of it instead of supported through it. And that's exactly what disenfranchised grief is. It's the kind where no one's officially acknowledging how deeply this event has impacted you, how deeply you may be broken over this event. The isolation is brutal for women like Nancy. Studies show that women suffer longer declines in functioning after a friend loss. Again, coming from PubMed. Nancy's guilt is not only personal, it's systemic. The burden of guilt, but no roadmap to actually healing. And especially for Nancy, where she can't even talk about it. But here's what I appreciate about Stranger Things. The show does not let Nancy swallow that guilt. She, ever the clever girl, decides pretty much right away to put a plan in action to do whatever she can. And that's what I love about Nancy. She's never really a victim of her feelings for too long. And even though the show picks up a year later, we know that she's been sitting with this weight on her shoulders for a year. And that is a long enough time for a teenage girl to have to sit with feelings this heavy without taking action. So when we meet her in the storyline, we need to feel that she's been sitting with this for a while, which I think the writing does really well. But it can also then move on quickly from that by letting her be the badass that she is and go on this, takedown with Murray that she ends up going on throughout the course of the season. That's what I love about it. And anyway, I did a little bit of research, just a little bit, on this idea of grief and survivor's guilt, and I just thought it was really interesting, and I really like where we pick up with Nancy's character. I like that we pick up in this place where she's experiencing so much of the weight of the trauma from season 1, and I like when shows can root into that. I don't like when we move on too quickly from things, and while I do think that a lot of the Barb storyline is put in here because the internet hashtag justice for Barb, really hard. I don't think that they would have done this if the internet didn't do that. But I do like that there is a very real component to, hey, if a teenage girl lost her best friend, it would be impactful. And what would the impact be? And I like that we get to go on that journey with Nancy. So let's dive into our quickie. We are starting with Chapter 1, Mad Max. It is written and directed by the Duffer Brothers. So we kick off in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with an armed robbery that instantly feels different from Hawkins. It's a gang, and the gang is fleeing when their leader, Callie, uses her psionic powers to trick the cops. And then we get this iconic shot of her wiping the blood away from her nose, and we get the tattoo where it says 008. It's another kid like Elle. There are more out there. Smash cut to Hawkins, where Dustin is coin surfing in his couch cushions, and we meet my favorite character of the season, Muse the cat. Tough for me. Tough for Muse. The boys at the arcade, where my second favorite character, Keith, breaks the news that Dustin has been dethroned in basically every game. While they argue, Will slips into the Upside Down again. Doors creaking open, the storm is raging outside, and boom, we get our first look at the Mind Flayer, our big bad for the season. Back in Hawkins proper, we re-enter the world of Daddy Hopper. Hi there, Daddy Hopper. We love you. Jimothy, we love you. And we meet my other favorite character, Murray, the conspiracy theorist who storms the police station ranting about a Russian child with powers. Hopper shuts him down, naturally. Meanwhile, Steve is trying to apply to college but realizes that his essay is absolute garbage. His real problems, though, they are incoming. And then the entrance of the year, Billy and Max. Billy is immediately a menace. Max is instantly iconic. I love Max Mayfield. You will come to know this about me as we go through these seasons. Will is still being bullied. We see that he's called Zombie Boy. Mr. Clark is back in teacher mode, and Max earns her arcade crown as Mad Max. Joyce is in her glow-up era. She is dating Sean Astin, a.k.a. Bob Sweet, lovable, doomed Bob. Hopper investigates a pumpkin patch where yesterday everything was perfect, but today, totally rotted. Nancy invites Jonathan to a party, Steve starts spiraling, and the boys dismiss Max's potential to be an arcade queen because she's a girl, even though she's way cooler than all of them. Will sees a doctor who seems sympathetic but is obviously in deep with the lab, and we learn that the team is trying to burn away all of the pieces of the Mother Gate that are left wide open from season 1. Elsewhere, Nancy and Steve have dinner with Barb's parents. We get this iconic line from Steve where he says, "finger licking good," and that makes me laugh every single time. Barb's parents reveal that they are selling their house to fund Murray's investigation. Justice for Barb is brewing. Mike, still mourning Elle, attempts to talk to her on the walkie-talkie even nearly a year later. Hopper goes home and the twist lands. He's secretly housing Elle in his cabin. And the final kicker, Will gets dragged fully into the Upside Down at night, facing the towering silhouette of the Mind Flayer. The storm is brewing. Okay, every episode we are going to do a Boombox Bliss and a Retro Glow. The Boombox Bliss is the best needle drop of the episode. Retro Glow is the best reference. So for this episode, our Boombox Bliss is Rock You Like a Hurricane by the Scorpions for Billy's grand entrance. I don't know if there is anything that is more perfect. It just fits. It just works. All of the music in Stranger Things is like a 12 out of 10, but this one in particular, when Billy just pulls up and opens the door and steps out and has a cigarette, it's just so good. It's so good. Okay, our Retro Glow is Dig Dug. I have a console for this at home. It probably doesn't work anymore. I have not played it in many years. However, it plugs into the TV, and I used to play Dig Dug all the time. I love Dig Dug, and this is one of my favorite games, and I love seeing it. We love an 80s Retro Glow Dig Dug throwback. Okay, Chapter 2. Trick or Treat Freak, written and directed, once again, by the Duffer Brothers. We finally get to Elle's side of the finale. She wakes up in the Upside Down after slaying the Demogorgon, finds a portal in the school, and slips back into the real world. This disgusts me every single time. The way that they need to push through the goop. Ew, I could throw up talking about this. The way that they could push through the membrane and it like breaks and pops. It's so vaginal and so disgusting. By the way, there's like nothing disgusting about vaginal and birth. So I don't know why it feels so disgusting when we watch it in Stranger Things, but it's gross. It's really gross. And every portal looks like a vagina. So it's semi-ironic, I suppose. When she goes to Mike's house, there are cops everywhere, and she realizes that reaching out to him will only put him in danger, so she disappears. Then we cut to the present. Elle wants to go trick-or-treating, but Hopper lays down the rules. No risks. Meanwhile, the boys are hyped for Halloween and they show up to school dressed as the Ghostbusters, only to realize no one else dressed up. Brutal. Second-hand embarrassment. Cue to a surprisingly layered moment. We get Mike and Lucas arguing about who has to be Winston, the only black Ghostbuster. Stranger Things finally gestures towards race this season, and it's really good as it gets a little bit deeper, and it starts right here in the second episode, and it will go much deeper, obviously, as the season goes on. Nancy, consumed by guilt about Barb, tries to lean on Steve, but he insists that they keep it a secret. At school, Lucas and Dustin finally approach Max, who remains unimpressed by their attempts. Amber gets increasingly paternal with Elle, bribing her with TV and ego-based negotiations. Billy continues his reign of terror, nearly running over the boys with his car, while Max tries to keep him in check. Jonathan lets Will trick-or-treat alone, and predictably, it ends badly. At the party, Billy does a keg stand and flashes his abs, all wet with beer running down them, and even though Billy is the worst, scene is really hot. The dark romance reader in me has conflicted feelings about Billy. Nancy spirals, and Steve just wants her to be able to hold it together. Instead, she gets drunk, rants about their quote-unquote bullshit relationship, and Jonathan ends up escorting her home. Steve leaves her at the party to lick his wounds. Meanwhile, Will has another upside-down episode, and this time the Mind Flayer chases him. Mike breaks him out of it and helps to get him home. Elle, furious that Hopper won't let her see Mike, attempts to reach him psychically. She succeeds, but Mike gets up just as she sees him, and it just feels so heartbreaking. And finally, the episode ends with Dustin in his full gremlin energy, finding something strange in the garbage can. Boombox bliss. I just want to say, this episode is an absolute banger of an episode for needle drops. So I'm going to mention my four-way tie, because it's my podcast and I can do whatever the fuck I want, between the Ghostbusters theme song, Monster Mash, Girls on Film, and Wango Tango. Now, Ghostbusters plays at the beginning and the end of the episode, and Monster Mash kind of plays like as the boys are about to go trick-or-treating. Girls on Film plays when Nancy's getting drunk at the party and Jonathan's like finding his way to her kind of deal, or watching her from the sideline. And Wango Tango is what's playing in the car when Billy nearly runs over the boys. And all four of those needle drops are just fucking perfect, and they work so well in this episode. So anyway, that's my four-way tie. And that's not even like half of the songs that are in this episode. Anyway, Retro Glow. The Ghostbusters costumes are amazing. Love this. Love that they dress up as the Ghostbusters for Halloween. All right. Chapter 3, The Pollywog, written by Justin Dauble and directed by Sean Levy. And here it is. Adorable, terrifying, nougat-loving new pet, Dart. He evicts poor Yertle the turtle to make room for him. Dustin is immediately smitten, naming him D'Artagnan, and convinces himself that Dart is completely harmless. Spoiler alert, he is not. In a flashback, Elle braves the woods and finds Hopper's cabin. Meanwhile, present-day Hop has to bribe her with a triple-decker Eggo extravaganza, setting up their prickly found family bond. But her resentment continues to build. She's trapped while her friends continue to live their life and grow and move on without her. Meanwhile, Bob, bless him, gives Will some truly disastrous advice. Face your fears and tell the bullies to go away. Sweet, but it's not going to work against a shadow monster. Lucas opens up to Max about what really happened last year, trying to bring her into the group. Nancy and Steve fight over honesty versus secrecy, with a one Jonathan Byers stuck in the middle. Hopper, suspicious of the lab, presses Dr. Owens about the rotting fields. Joyce watches the security footage of Will being tormented, her panic intensifying as she discovers the shadow monster in the footage. At school, the boys show Dart to Max, but Mike is skeptical after Will confesses to him about coughing up a slug last year. Will's flashbacks confirm it. This is not a normal creature, and the boys argue over what to do, excluding Max once again. Dart escapes. Chaos ensues. Meanwhile, Elle, furious at Hopper's rules, ventures to the school searching for Mike. She arrives just in time to see him with Max, and she is jealous, and she is hurt, and she is convinced that she has been replaced, so she lashes out with her powers and flees before anyone can see her. Dustin finds Dart, and at the same time, in the worst possible move, Will gets transported into the Upside Down again. The shadow monster looms, and this time, it doesn't just scare him. It possesses him. Noah Schnapp really delivers one of the best performances here. And Bob's advice? Officially the worst. Alright, here's our boombox bliss. You don't mess around with Jim, and this is playing as Elle and Hopper are kind of sweeping the house and getting it all organized and stuff like that. And it's really heartwarming, and I just think this is a really good scene, and the song really works well. Retro glow. D'Artagnan. D'Artagnan is the narrator for the book The Three Musketeers, who were essentially the King's Guard in like the 17th century France. They had little fleur-de-lis on their uniforms, and D'Artagnan was not a musketeer yet. He's like a musketeer in training type of deal, but he becomes friends, obviously, with the other musketeers that we see, the other three musketeers. And I just thought it was interesting that our Dart would not be like the other Demogorgons, whereas like D'Artagnan's not really a musketeer yet, and Dart is not really a Demogorgon and doesn't really have the same Demogorgon things, like he eats nougat and he's friends with Justin, I guess. So just like there is a separation between the Dart and D'Artagnan and like the collective that they belong to, the musketeers or the Demogorgons. I don't know, I just thought that was interesting, and I wonder if it was intentional or if it just felt fun to do that with the Three Musketeers and the nougat and that kind of tie-in. Alright, let's crack open our burn book where we will look at the superlatives for this episode. The Bold and Bothered Award. This award is strictly for the Femme and the Furious. It is the quote or the moment that really relays feminine rage, and in this episode it goes to one drunk Nancy Wheeler calling her relationship with Steve the Hare Harrington absolute bullshit. The Shiro Award. This is the award that goes to the baddie who is the most inspiring, or the moment that is the most empowering, and in this episode it goes to Max Mayfield, aka Mad Max, for crushing the top score on every single arcade game. The Femme Fatale Award. You know, for the most smash the patriarchy moment of the episode, and while I'm sure there are better answers, Erica's whole conversation with Lucas about him being a nerd and then just silently mouthing nerd is an all-time favorite of mine over all seasons. Erica is the best. Speak Your Truth Trophy. The best quote or line from this episode, and it goes to... Oh, I'm just laughing at what I had here because I didn't remember it. Okay, it goes to compromise. C-O-M, promise. It means halfway happy. But I wrote in my notes. But the runner-up would be Steve saying, it's finger-licking good. I know I mentioned that earlier. I'm glad I did. I didn't remember that I wrote this down here, but it's really one of my favorite lines. It makes me laugh. It's so funny. All right. Honorary heartthrob, because I am just a girl, okay? And I want to talk about the most swoon-worthy moments. And for this episode, it goes to Jonathan taking Nancy home and making sure she's okay when her boyfriend leaves her pretty much blackout drunk at a party because he's offended by something that she said when she was blacked out drunk. So anyway, thanks for listening to this week's episode of Femme Furious. I hope you like it. We will be back on Tuesday deep diving into the series finale of The Summer I Turned Pretty. If you haven't heard, we are getting a movie, so we will be doing some more The Summer I Turned Pretty coverage later on, probably in 2027. I'm looking forward to it. But we will be back on Tuesday doing a deep dive into the series finale for now, and then I will be back next Friday with episodes 4 through 6 of Season 2 of Stranger Things as we continue our little deep dive. And until then, don't get transported accidentally into the Upside Down and get possessed by a mind flayer. Bye!